I'm Kristen. I saw a lot of you this morning. I'm going to do Rory's introduction. Before we introduce him, I want to give you just a little bit of perspective on why this matters so much to me. We work with shelters all over the country, and everywhere we go, we find that people say, we bring in students we bring like 20 students at a time, and we'll bring in these students from all these shelters, and inevitably every shelter writes their save rate on the board, and they all tell us 94%, 97%, 98%, every single one. And when we delve down into the data, when we're teaching these shelters, we get closer to 75%. 80%, 82%. And what our wish is that shelters would just be celebrating where they're actually at instead of feeling like they have to be dishonest about where they are at. And the craziest part to me of all of this is out of all those shelters that lie to us, only about 50% even know they're lying. They think they're telling us their real data. They don't even know what's dying in their shelters. So as someone who teaches hundreds of students from around the country in different shelters every year, this presentation is really about how to have true integrity around data, and that integrity is the future of the movement, because until we know what's dying, we can't solve for those problems. So have any of you heard about counting owner-requested euthanasia, not counting it in your numbers? Have any of you done that, not included it in your death rate? So we work with shelters all the time who will calculate, they'll leave out like 20% of their animals, and they'll call them owner requests, but they're actually not letting people sign them over for life-saving. They're making people sign them over for euthanasia. Does that make sense? So you come, you have a 2-year-old pit bull dog in the middle of summer, and they say, we can only accept this for euthanasia. And we can take it, but it's going to be an owner-requested euthanasia, and it's not counted in their data. It's one of the many common tricks shelters are still playing, that they're still lying about their data. So it's something that we see far too often, and a lot of us don't even know we're doing it. And Rory, I'm sorry, I have one more quick story. Okay. So I was in Fairfax in 2013, and we had a save rate of 71%, and we were writing all over the internet that our save rate was 91%. And we were making people sign animals over for euthanasia. I was doing this in 2013, 2014, until this one day that these people came and they brought in these 2 7-year-old German Shepherds, and they surrendered them for euthanasia. They said they were medically suffering, and it was so sad. They were just such beautiful dogs, and they were walking back to be killed. We walked them straight to the back of the building. That was it. They were walking back to be killed, and I stopped them, and it was sort of this moment of realizing that this was really wrong. But it never occurred to me that it was wrong, because it was just how things were done. And that comes from the Asilomar Accords, which started, I don't know, in 2000. What year was Asilomar? Anybody in this room know? 2006? And it was supposed to be better calculating of animals, but what it did is it ended up taking whole groups out. So, okay. Hi, this is Rory. Hi. So Rory is here to talk about data, but he probably won't tell you that he spends all of his time doing public records requests of shelters and finding out what's really going on. And he does his detective work. Sometimes it takes him many, many hours to figure out, but he's learned all of the ways that we're manipulating data, and so that's some of what he'll share today.
You're very kind.
Thanks.
All right, so we're here to talk about shelter data, how to get it, read it, and use it to influence change. So my interest in data started when I was working at Maddie's Fund. I started there as the dog program coordinator, and we were working on developing tools for foster programs by running our own foster program. At the time, my mentor, Dr. Sagerson, who's amazing and is here, gave me a list of webinars to watch, and I knew who Dr. Jefferson was, and I knew what Austin Pets Live was, but I just had this brain explosion when I watched Saving the Bottom 50%. If you've not watched this webinar, watch it. Basically, it just gave me this whole new revelation of why data was important, and I went down this huge rabbit hole. So this whole presentation is about looking at who's still dying in your community and working off of that. Dr. Jefferson's is, and it's amazing, and it all just made so much sense to me. So I started going around to shelters because I didn't think that this would be challenging because I was very naive. So I just started going around to shelters and saying, who's still dying in your shelter? Can you help me with that? And everyone said, oh, we're saving all the healthy, treatable animals. No one's dying in our shelter. So then I met Biscuit, who was in the back of the shelter, and found a foster for Biscuit, went back to go get Biscuit to deliver him to his foster, and he had been killed. So I started scratching my head. I'm like, if a dog like this is still dying in animal shelters where they're telling me that all the healthy and treatable animals are getting out alive, something's going on here. So I started sleuthing around. And this was also around the time when I learned about Asilomar Accords. Are you all familiar with Asilomar Accords? So Asilomar Accords was created 10 or 12 years ago at this point. And it's not the worst because at least you can put this number back in. A lot of people just take this number out, and if they're not using Asilomar Accords, you can't get it back in. But this is Asilomar Accords, and if you can see this highlighted, says owner-requested euthanasia. And on this particular shelter, there were 4,000 animals that were backed out through owner-requested euthanasia. So that's a lot. So when we talk about owner-requested euthanasia, we believe that these animals should be treated like every other animal that comes into your shelter. So much so that it probably shouldn't be an intake type anymore, or even a sub-intake type. Just take it off. If animals need sheltering, they need sheltering, and treat them as if they're coming in through the doors the same way, no matter what. Kristen got into this a little bit. The vast majority of shelters are not reporting complete and accurate data. There may be a million different reasons for this. Yes, they might be hiding information from you. More often than not, they might actually have never looked at their data. Either way, it doesn't really matter. It's sort of the job, I believe, of advocates to help educate directors on what we think they need to do for the animals in our community. And I think a huge piece of that is really understanding the data yourself so that you can go and lead that. So that's, hopefully you can get some of that out of this today. So numbers are lives. We talk about this a lot. I sometimes have to stand up and walk around a room when I'm doing these public information requests because I just get so overwhelmed by the amount of animal lives being killed in these institutions. And I actually recently was speaking to somebody who said that it's only 15 parvo puppies. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because if I was in a room, and I urge you all to think about this too, if I was in a room with 15 puppies, and someone said, it's just 15 puppies, let's just kill them all, I would certainly be trying to help those puppies, right? I think we all would be. And the other thing when I hear if it's only 15 puppies, then why aren't we figuring out some way to help the 15 puppies that are sick? So knowing those numbers really does help us sort of like put things into perspective, I think. Because 15 puppies is not 1,500 puppies, but it's a manageable number. And if those are the only parvo puppies that are dying in your shelter or your community, someone can help 15 puppies. So data saves lives. That's why we're here today. When we know which groups of animals are dying, we can start building programs and coming up with solutions to save those groups of animals. So we often look at big picture data and live release rate. With animal by animal data, we're going to get into actually the groups of animals that are dying in your community. So you're not just going to be looking at, oh, it's 2,000 animals that are still dying. You can actually look at the reasons for death and start attaching solutions and programs. And this is all what Austin Pets Alive and Dr. Jefferson have been doing for a decade. And I want to mention that all of these animals in this presentation were saved after doing a gap analysis in Pima Animal Care Center and starting to try to get programs built and foster care for these medical animals. So why do you want to understand data? I'm sure that probably a lot of these reasons, and I think I'm just going to try to keep moving quickly because I lost time, so I'm not actually going to ask you why you want to understand data today. So the goals of this presentation today are to understand the difference between big picture and animal by animal data so that you can start thinking about what question you're trying to answer in your community and then know which type of data you need. I'm also going to go over how to get the information, and I think it's fascinating, but it might be kind of a snoozer, so sorry. And hopefully you'll leave understanding how to calculate live release rate the way that American Pets Alive wants us all to be calculating live release rate, which is noses in, noses out. Before we start, common discrepancies. These are things to watch out for when you start looking at numbers. And again, this may be on purpose, it may not be on purpose, it really doesn't matter. Maybe it does matter a little bit, but not that much. So combining dead on arrival and died in care, if you combine these two numbers, dead on arrival are not counted as outcomes, died in care are. So it's impossible to calculate live release rate. I see this 3 out of 10 public information requests I do. Backtracking numbers after the fact. This is why it's important to have an end count and a start count and an end count. Those numbers should add up, and I can share how to look at all of that calculation too with all of you. But numbers shouldn't change. If you look at something from November and then you look at it again, those numbers should be the same. And if they aren't, ask why, because maybe there's a good reason, but likely it's just probably a little erasing. Not counting owner-requested euthanasia. We talk a lot about this at this conference. 2 ways that you can look at this. If organizations are advertising ORE, but they're not listed anywhere on their website, or if you call and say, do you do owner-requested euthanasia, but then they're not showing up anywhere. Another thing that we see, unfortunately, is people signing animals over at intake as owner-requested euthanasia. So if someone brings a big dog in or a diabetic cat, and really they just want to surrender the animal, they might be signed over for owner-requested euthanasia to be able to back that animal life out of data. Every animal should be counted regardless of reason for intake. We're gonna say that over and over and over. Double counting foster. So, no, not counting died in care, sorry. Not counting died in care at all. This is starting to go away a little bit, but you'll still see that not counting died in care, and then people sometimes will actually let animals die in care so that they don't have to count them. That's super extreme, but it does happen. Double counting foster, so one animal has 2 live outcomes because you outcome them as foster, but then you outcome them as an adoption too. They never come back in yeah. And then double counting puppies and kittens. So a litter is 1 intake, and then the puppies and kittens have multiple outcomes. So it'll be 1 and then turn into 5, 6, 8, 12 live outcomes. So we've talked about this a little bit, but 2 kinds of data, the big picture, animal by animal. I'm gonna go through a couple of case studies to sort of show you what this information has showed me doing this a couple of times. So the first one's big picture. And I urge you all, if you're looking for any sort of information like this, always ask the director first. We want to be building relationships as much as possible, and if people will give you information, that is going to help build trust and relationship more than doing a public information request and you've never asked for it ever. So try that first, and then this, or use a fake name. So, big picture. In this particular shelter, advocates thought that cats were dying more often than dogs. They really believed this. Like, I'd be walking down the street, people would come up to me and be like, just so you know, cats are dying more than dogs. Really, this was happening every time I was at the shelter. I pulled the information, and actually dogs were dying 3-to-1 to cats. So, animal by animal. This shows us why animals are dying. You can look at details of trends and then create targeted programs. You can also look at specific management issues. So if you notice that animals are dying a lot on Saturday, maybe there's not enough people, maybe there's a particular manager in the clinic, something's going on there. So you can really start looking at a lot of details. Advocates believe that behavior was the #1 reason dogs were dying in the shelter. And that's not a behavior dog, that's a distemper dog. Miles, he's very cute. That's him in his home. But what data showed us was that actually 66% of the dogs dying in this particular shelter were due to medical conditions. So people thought it was behavior, they'd never looked at the numbers, and then they found out that it was actually medical. So, calculating live release rate. There are too many people talking about this right now. There is a really super simple way to do this. This is the most clean, simple way to calculate live release rate. So if you're looking for something that's no tricks, no hoops, nothing like that, there are only so many outcome types. And I know that this looks really confusing, and come to our workshop later if you want to actually go through this. But there's only so many outcome types that happen at an animal shelter. Adoption, return to owner, transfer are the live outcome types that happen at an animal shelter. Died in care, euthanized, lost, missing, stolen are the non-live outcome types that happen at an animal shelter. So, to get all outcomes, you add the live, the non-live, and you get the all right? And then, to calculate live release rate, you put live over all. You don't have to subtract anything, multiply anything, add anything. You just take live outcomes, divide it by all outcomes, and then it gives you a rate. A rate to get a percentage needs to be turned into a percentage. So if it's a small number, you make it a percentage by multiplying by 100. Yeah? All right. So this one's important. Owner-requested euthanasia, which we talk about a lot. So what's the problem with backing out owner-requested euthanasia? The public never knows about these animals, so they do not have a chance to live. It also incentivizes, we talked about this a little bit, but it incentivizes shelters to force people to sign pets over for euthanasia. So, why were we talking about that? Oh, because this case study showed me that my slides got messed up. Okay, this case study showed me, I remember though, that even after they changed the intake type and took away the ORE intake type and put it as a sub-intake type, there were still 66% more animals being killed with this intake type than without. And when we looked at those records, you might be thinking, oh, but maybe they were really sick or this or that. That's not what was happening. It was just that they're coming in with this intake type. People are used to killing them, and so they're just continuing to do that. Okay. So when you're asking for this information, if you want big picture data, this is the information that you need to ask for. And I can send this to anybody who wants it also. So you want all intakes, all outcomes, all live outcomes, all other outcomes. For animal by animal data, you want to ask for all records with notes, and you need to be really explicit when you do these public information requests. You need to ask for all records with notes of animals with the outcome types of list them out, and then say, this should look like a stack of kennel cards. And it should look like a stack of kennel cards. Then you can look through and see, oh, parvo, oh, distemper, oh, heartworm, oh, this one has no notes. So how do you get the data? That's the big question, right? Thanks to Lyndon B. Johnson, given a pen and a lot of pressure, we have, that's him, reluctantly signing. He really didn't want to sign this. And we might not have this for very much longer, so take advantage of it. So all states have mandates that require municipal and municipal contracted animal shelters to share their public records. Every single municipal or municipal contracted animal shelter is legally obligated under federal law to provide you with this information. That was in 1966, by the way. That's not him actually signing FOIA, but it is him. So, the rules of animal shelter public records requests, and this is important. Know what question you want to answer. Do not try to get more data than you want, because it's just gonna make everything a lot harder. So know what question you're trying to answer and work backwards from that question. Only ask for what you need. Pages are sometimes money when it comes to this stuff, so just be super mindful of what you actually need and just ask for that. And expect to hear nothing. Crickets, you're not gonna get anything back. You might get a nice little note that says, we've received your public information request, and then you never hear anything again. So be persistent. I pick up the phone. I hound these people. I'm like, hey, Charlie, me again. Got any more information for me? And be prepared to be given misinformation, the wrong information, have people tell you that things are only written on little note cards that are stuffed in someone's sock drawer at home. You should still be able to have that information. So say, that sounds fantastic. I would love to have some photos of Mr. Smith's note cards with, stuffed in a sock drawer. And they have to give that to you. So even if it's not in a shelter software system, and if your shelter does not have a shelter software system, find someone from American Pets Live and we can help you with that. But even if they don't have shelter software, or they only use email, or they only have a log, it doesn't matter how they're tracking this information. It is still should be accessible to each and every one of us. So every state, we mentioned this, every state has a FOIA law. This website is amazing. It lists state by state every law, and you can copy and paste. And it even gives you a little sample request. It's really lovely. How long does a PIR take? This is Muckrock. They're obsessed with public information, and so they have this great website too, where they tell you how long it takes, and they also list their laws. So check them out, Muckrock. Who do you send it to? I always have this question, so I just use google.com, and I say, google.com, where do I send a public information request for Galveston County, Texas? And then it tells me. public information and open records. It's pretty awesome. And a lot of the time, I should say it's not that simple, because sometimes the city or the county, they'll tell you, I don't have it, or I don't have it, or I don't have it. So that's when I also pick up the phone and say, hey, it seems like you don't know where I should get this, but can you put me on the phone with someone who does know? And they'll help you. So so I would just pick up the phone. People are pretty nice in these offices. I think they're there because they want people to have information. But I'm also sometimes strangely naive. Okay, so this is what you need to include in your request: the law of the state where the shelter is located, the name of the shelter you're trying to get information about, and then the most specific language possible. How much you're willing to spend. So I say, if this is going to cost over $15, please call me. And they'll call you. Or they'll say, this is going to cost $3,000. If they don't have the information you're looking for, they at least have to tell you they don't have it. So you will get a note back that says, I don't have that information. But that's also one of your rights. Know your rights. So does it cost money? It does, but there's no rhyme or reason to this. So I've asked for this request. It costs $600. Same request, which I thought, same request, 70 cents. $600, 70 cents. Why? I don't know. So I had to mail these people a check for 70 cents, which I did. I think they were actually trying to get me to leave them alone because they thought I wasn't going to send them a check for 70 cents, but I did, so. Then I got my request. So like I said, if you need help reading the data, email me, but practice getting the data yourself. More of us need to be empowered to get this information ourselves, and not my computer, I don't know who's messaging someone on this computer. But if you need help reading the data, please email me and I can help you, because these are some examples of what this can look like. It's really ugly, some of this stuff. I mean, no one wants to look at that. But I'm happy to get on the phone with you and go through that, look at it together. Sometimes it looks like this. Less ugly, but still ugly. That's an animal, but not really. Okay. So, your challenge: file a public information request and then tell me about it, please. Please. If we could do this, that would be awesome. And I have some time for questions.
I've got a question about length of stay.
Sure.
How do you handle, there's data anomalies when you're getting an animal with multiple visits to a shelter, so they get adopted, they're out for a month or so, then they come back. Do you start the length of stay over again? Do you find the length of stay? I don't think you have a record, but how's it handled? It screws up the data.
It does, although it doesn't. I mean, it does and it doesn't. I think that we haven't really, it's a really good question. The question was, how do we handle animals coming back multiple times? Do we start the length of stay over? I say yes, and then look at how many times that animal has been returned, but there might be people that will say other things. This is another issue with data, right? We do not have standard ways that we're looking at this. And so Kelly Dewar was telling me that there was a calculation of length of stays that she had seen, and we're just all over the place. We need to get together and standardize a lot of this stuff together. So, Kristen, do you have anything about length of stay that you want to add about, because I know you just were part of that length of stay study, so Kristen might have a better answer than me.
We're working with Gary Petronic, who did a lot of the research on big dogs and shelters, and one of the things we found is there's no consistency in how length of stay is calculated. So you need to be looking at more than just length of stay. You need to look at length of stay in shelter versus how long they're in your system. And you also, the metric that I'm most interested in right now is length of stay before an animal becomes available to the public. We find
Oh,
that
yeah.
that number's often 2 to 3 weeks. They're being held in the back of a shelter, and so that might be the most significant metric related to length of stay, because as soon as they become available and visible, they're leaving, but they're sometimes being held for weeks or months.
And that's a really good point. Thanks, Kristen. We really suggest that animals be made available immediately. And we have some sessions about that tomorrow, too. So definitely go to those if that's happening. Okay, well, I think I'm out of time, but come to our session later. Thank you so much, and thanks for dealing with my technical difficulties.